Today we are talking NC State men's basketball. On Monday, John Rothstein from CBS Sports posted a tweet that NC State was about to engage in a 2-year series against Ole Miss, a neutral site series on the men's basketball side. It's just another quality opponent for NC State on their non-conference schedule. We're going to discuss that today. I've got Jake McSwain with me. And Jake, first, let's talk about this Ole Miss matchup. We know, look, coaches rule, right? Coaches rule today. And a guy like Chris Beard, and we're going to probably be talking about this a lot with NC State's schedule, you can just trust that he's going to have a quality team there. And you know, for NC State, this is going to be a quality matchup.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this is like one of the first marquee games we've seen scheduled under Will Wade because, I mean, you look back over the past few years, NC State's played Ole Miss a few times at this point,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be in through some invitational type tournaments or just in home series, I believe. But a little bit of history there. State's not done well against them the last few times that they've played. So for me, though, I think it's a team that usually is going to have a ton of athleticism, is going to play set you up for a fun game nonetheless, and it's going to be a quality opponent. But more than that, I think it sets you up for playing teams that are built like them, even if they are a better basketball team. Like you're getting used to playing that style of play and that type of team early on in the season. I think kind of pays benefits for you if you're a team that's shaped up to be competitive as the year goes along.
Yeah, and I think it gives you a little bit of a cushion playing it at a neutral site, right? You know, with it being a neutral site from a net standpoint, it's now a top 50 game. It becomes a quad one opportunity versus top 30 at home or top 75 on the road. So for both teams, it gives them a little cushion there to where you can maybe squeeze another quad one game out depending on where you're at. But I think for NC State, getting it in Greensboro is big, right? We know you want as many opportunities you can play in Greensboro, Charlotte as you can because of where the ACC tournament typically is being played. So I think it's a quality matchup for NC State. Like I said, I trust Chris Beard to have a strong team. I think they're going to have another one here this year, and this is just adds to NC State's schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you look at it being in Greensboro, like this is the type of neutral site game that you want if you're NC State. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
getting a team that's not in the region or area. You're getting to play in Greensboro where you should have a really strong showing. And then so you kind of have a bit of a tilt on a neutral site. So it's kind of like playing the net game a little bit there, and I like the way they're setting it up. Now I'm curious though, where would they play that? Is the second half of
Right.
this neutral game going to be like some other part of Mississippi?
Yeah, I don't know where you're going in Mississippi to get a neutral site game.
Yeah, not many
I need to be
options.
careful with my words there. Yeah, I mean, look, Mississippi, great state. All those things. I just nothing comes to mind in terms of what would be kind of a hub to where you could play a neutral site game there. So maybe you get two. Maybe you
Hmm.
do Charlotte. Maybe you do Atlanta. Maybe you do somewhere Shreveport. Right? Maybe they could probably find Memphis. They could probably find somewhere they may try and do it next year. But this first one is in Greensboro. And I think that this is one of the three, what I would label, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, like really marquee matchups for NC State, because you also have the matchup against Kansas at home and Bill Self. I told you this was going to be about coaches here as we move through this thing, right? And then
Hmm.
you have the ACC SEC Challenge game against Auburn. First, let's talk about this Kansas matchup. State went and played there last year, didn't play great, but still, I thought Kansas was down a little bit last year. Not sure how Kansas is going to be this year, if I'm being
Hmm.
honest with you. Hey, NC State landed a big one in Darian Williams that Kansas wanted. So is this a game for you where you're looking at it and saying NC State has a legitimate chance at winning this one? And this is probably going to be the first, like obviously you're going to have the season opener under real weight,
Hmm.
but this is that first big home matchup for him, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, and maybe this is me being the forever optimist that I can be sometimes, but I don't think there's any games on the calendar next year where it's like you don't feel like you have a legitimate chance. And maybe that's just
No.
like, some people have that baked in from being a state fan for so long, but like this is a team that's going to come into the season being a top 25-ish team. And like you have to feel good about your chances, especially in games like this. And I mean, you look at the just dumpster fire that last year was, and playing at Kansas, and I mean that game couldn't have started worse for NC State,
Mhm.
and they still kind of played themselves back into that game. So it's like I don't know, you can't compare year over year, but I just feel like it's a game that State could start to set the tone with a little bit next year.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about non-conference schedules is as a coaching staff, and I think at NC State, assistant coach Brandon Chambers is in control for the most part of putting state schedule together. We have a story on the website on Chambers discussing the schedule, so make sure you check that out from Chambers. But yeah, the coaching staff's in control of putting the schedule together. Outside of really two opportunities, Jake. The first one is the Maui Invitational, which we'll talk about here in a second. You know who the
Mm-hmm.
teams are, but you don't really know who you'll play, so you don't have really control of that. So we'll talk about Maui in a second. But the other every year for the ACC is the ACC SEC Challenge. And you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to get a bottom SEC team. You don't know if you're going to get a high level SEC team. And for NC State this year, they drew Auburn, who last year was, for most of the season, the number one team in the country, or certainly top two or three.
Mm-hmm.
And of these three teams, Jake, I think Auburn is the one I feel best about because of where that program is, and with Bruce Pearl, and just kind of like I feel like he of any even above Kansas, I feel like he's going to reload with them being in the SEC
Yeah,
and having
and their
that game
best
on the
players coming
road,
back. You know what I mean?
right? And their
Yeah.
best players coming back, and you're having that game on the road where you've got like it's almost kind of a kind of a free swing at just a total resume building game, right? It's not going to hurt you to lose that game to Auburn.
No.
But if you win it, that's one where you can go whatever position you're in. If you're fighting for seed lines, if you're fighting for maybe you're on the bubble, that's one that could swing in a massive way your way.
Yeah, and I think it's going to give you a really unique pulse check on where you are, and kind of like a reality check for the team in a good way or a bad way. Like if you feel like you're good and could contend and be like a top, a seed 4 or higher, that's a game that you need to do well in and kind of show yourself that you're right there. But we made this graphic. I'm going to pull it up. Like when you're looking at some of the marquee games that State has next year in their out of conference schedule, I mean, even some of the ones that you don't want them to headline you, like a VCU or Liberty, like those are traditionally solid teams. And then you mix in Ole Miss, Auburn, Kansas, and you're going to get a couple of these teams. That last box there for Maui, I mean, like that's a hitter's row of an out of conference schedule for NC State. So I'm curious, your opinion on this, but when was the last time State had an out of conference schedule that was kind of this complete so early, or like this challenging, I should say?
Never that I can recall. Because I'm telling you, to me, the difference is, and when you look at those teams, if you want to pull that graphic back up, we've already talked about Ole Miss, Kansas, and Auburn. I mean, those three teams last year were in, I think, the top 25 of the net, and you can pretty much bank on them being there again. I mean, that's three non-conference games that are going to be quad one opportunities for you that are top 30 opponents. But then you start looking at VCU. They're always good, right? VCU's always good. I think according to Bart Torvik right now going into the season, he has VCU 46 overall. He has Liberty at 86. So that's another team right there. Another team not even on the graphic, UAB, 125. Like it sounds high, but when you're talking about now, that would be 7 of your non-conference games, which are 125 or above. Jake, typically for NC State, you've got 7 in the bottom 300s.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's where the schedule to me is different. Not only do you have the headliners, but State this year, I think, have done a good job of cutting out that bottom, those bottom feeders and adding in quality opponents in the middle that, if you take care of business like you're supposed to, they're going to be good wins for you. And even if you don't, like a loss to VCU, it's not going to kill you, right?
No.
Like it's not going to hurt you.
No, it
So
doesn't.
I don't think from a scheduling standpoint, and we haven't even mentioned Maui. If you want to bring that back up, we can kind of go over a couple of Maui teams. But you look at it, you've got 5 there: Washington State, Southern Cal, Texas, Arizona State, and Boise State. All 5 of those opponents are going to be solid teams, really good teams. You didn't mention Seton Hall's not on the graphic, and Chaminade as well. But if you can play 3 more of those opponents right there that's on the graphic, I don't recall a schedule where you're looking at it, and that would give you probably 10 teams that are top 150 or higher from a net standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at you could play, 8 or more like NCAA tournament caliber teams before you start playing conference games. And now that's my question for you, James, is do you see this as what we can expect from Will Wade and staff moving forward as far as scheduling goes, or do you view this as more of a concern around what, like, the quality of game they're going to get in the ACC next year as far as setting themselves up to make the NCAA tournament?
We sat down and talked with Coach Chambers about his strategy on building a schedule, and he said it's very simple. They try to pair the schedule with the team. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? He's basically, what he's saying is, if we think we're in a rebuilding year, you won't see a schedule like this. But if we think we're competitive and we think we have a chance to be a top 25 team, we're going to play a schedule like this. And that's the cool thing about being able to really put the schedule together how you wish. And I think that's one of the things I hope the other teams in the ACC will adopt moving forward. Like, no disrespect to a Boston College or a Cal or a Stanford, they shouldn't be playing a schedule like this.
Hell, NC State last year.
Yeah, NC State last year, right? You should not. Miami, you should not be playing a schedule like this. Last year's version of Miami. Yeah. Obviously, they've kind of retooled their roster as well. Mm-hmm. But I think the ACC's they've struggled with this in the last 3 or 4 years. And it's one of the reasons why the league has not done so well non-conference wise is their teams aren't scheduling based on what they have. We talked about it, Jake, in one of our features. I think it was Texas we used as an example. Texas came to NC State last year, and you watched that game. I don't think Texas was drastically better than NC State. I mean, they won the game, I believe, by 2 or 4. Maybe they had a dunk late. I think they go to 4. State had the ball to win the game there with seconds left. And Texas went 6-12 in the SEC and made the NCAA tournament. Why? Because every team in the SEC did well from a non-conference standpoint. Texas won 11-2 in the non-conference, and the best team they faced was UConn, who finished 30 in the net. They played no top 30 teams in the net. The next highest was Ohio State. Ironically, they lost to the 2 best teams in their non-conference schedule, but it didn't matter because they won the other 11, and most of them they won convincingly and didn't really, outside of that NC State game, challenge themselves. And so I think the SEC gets it. Schedule to who you are and let the chips fall. So to answer your question, yeah, I think you're going to see the schedule from NC State, assuming they feel like they have the roster to handle it.
Yeah. And I think when you start projecting NC State out and you're looking at the non-conference schedule, like, you can, like, let's assume they win the VCU and Liberty games. Like, there's a chance they could lose them, but let's assume you win those. Mm-hmm. If you can split that Auburn, Ole Miss, or, like, if you can win against Auburn, you could lose against Ole Miss and Kansas and still be in really good shape. But you're talking about now, if you can win 2 of the 3 versus Ole Miss, Auburn, and Kansas, and then handle the competition in Maui, the pressure against you in the ACC just starts to fall off. Like, as far as, like, the feeling the need to do something crazy in the ACC regular season, because your resume is pretty set at that point. Like, there's really not going to be that many question marks as long as you don't completely shit the bed in the ACC. But then if you do a good job, then you're talking about a team that could be a 3 seed or higher, because you're going to have some of those marquee wins. And if you knock a couple more off in conference, then, I mean, you're setting yourself up to be a high seed if you take care of business.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this a little more in depth on another feature here, but what it reminds me of is what Pat Kelsey did in year 1 at Louisville with their schedule. If you're going to look at their schedule in year 1 from a net standpoint, they played Tennessee, they played Indiana, they played West Virginia. They played those 2 teams in the battle for Atlantis. They also played Oklahoma. So basically they had their match. Now, it turned out well for them. They got Indiana, West Virginia, and Oklahoma, 3 teams that were in the top 60. They played Ole Miss as their SEC ACC challenge. And then they played Kentucky. So they played, 6 games against SEC, Big 10, or Big 12 opponents. And their lowest ranked team they played outside of the top 150 was Bellarmine, 1 team. They were 360 and they beat them by 40, like you're supposed to do. And so now the crazy thing with Louisville, Jake, is they lost to Tennessee, they lost to Oklahoma, they lost to Ole Miss, they lost to Kentucky. But it didn't really matter because they had bumped up their non-conference metrics to where they were strong still non-conference. And then what it also did, I think, and this is kind of to your point earlier, had them in such a good position going into the ACC.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had challenged themselves so well to where when they went into league play, it just felt like what they'd seen all non-conference already. And I think it really, if you're NC State, you're hoping now. Again, I think they're hoping for more wins than Louisville got non-conference, but they'd probably take what did Louisville go 18-2 in the ACC?
Yeah,
Jake, I'd like to let you know if I will take 7-4 non-conference if I can go 18-2
every day of the week. Sign me up.
right,
You know what I mean?
right in the ACC. Yeah, but I think that prepared them for it. And like I said, they had a top 35 non-conference strength of schedule. They did not hurt themselves non-conference. They scheduled quality opponents.
And I'll say that to your point back about what the assistant coach was saying, that's the beauty of college basketball scheduling is it is a year-to-year thing, and you're setting up games because you have more to schedule, but you can do the majority of that the year of, and you can adapt it to your team. Whereas football, we've seen it with NC State football several times where you get kind of stuck with a, not as advantageous out-of-conference schedule because that's been set up for 5-6 years at that point.
Right, and the cool thing with this schedule is you've got the return neutral site game against Ole Miss. I believe they have a return game against VCU as well. I think that was a 2-game series.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say maybe the UAB one was. So you already know you've got three opponents for next year locked in that are going to be quality opponents, and then you can kind of build around it with Kansas falling off the schedule. So we wanted to discuss.
Let me ask you one question before we wrap up here, and I'm curious and for your perspective on this. If you could pick one or two schools that you would just love to see on NC State's schedule over the next few years, what would that school be for you?
So the first one I'll pick is an old rival, Maryland.
That would be a fun one.
I would love to see Maryland because I think that game's always like for me. When I was in college at NC State, you had Duke, you had North Carolina, obviously, and I'm talking camping out for games and trying to get tickets. People may not know this. State did it for Maryland too, because that was when they had Gary Williams. At least when I was there, they were rolling. Lonnie Baxter, Steve Blake, those guys. They went to won a national championship. They were elite. So that was a game, and I'm talking if you like some of my fondest memories of watching NC State basketball was Reynolds Coliseum. And the fans getting on Gary Williams and him sweating like crazy and flipping the bird, running out of the stadium after a win that they got. So yeah, Maryland would be up there for me. Not to mention you've got regional rivalries there. Like I know if you're NC State, you have a ton of tradition recruiting the DMV area. I just think that'd be a natural game for me. That would be the first one because I was going to go Georgetown, kind of similar, but I just think you have more ties there to Maryland. But the other one would probably be for me. I would like to see him do something similar with Tennessee. I would because I think, especially if it plays out like I think it might, and Justin Gainey potentially being a coach in waiting there, to where you've got an NC State alum on that staff. I know him and Coach Wade have a relationship, and Tennessee's just they're kind of like we talked about with Auburn right now with Rick Barnes. Mm-hmm. Tennessee with Rick Barnes is kind of like Bruce Pearl in Auburn, right?
Yeah.
You don't even have to look at the roster. They're going to be good.
Yeah.
And so if you can schedule those two opponents for me, sign me up.
Absolutely. Only thing I would add is I would love to see one of the traditional Big East powers like a UConn or something, or Villanova.
Yeah. That's why I was going to go Georgetown, like a team from out there. But look, I think that's the cool thing that we've learned from NC State from this scheduling standpoint is they're going to go out and try and challenge themselves. And the other positive to having a coach like Will Wade as your head coach, other teams want to face him. You got some clout. You've got some power to where when you go call, teams are answering, right? Like teams are answering to set these up with you because they know Will Wade brings a ton of exposure with him, and it's going to help their program out as well. So we wanted to discuss the non-conference schedule with you all today. It's still being finalized. I think there's one or two games left to be finalized, but with the Ole Miss news coming out, this was a good time to get out and discuss it. So, like I said, we have an article up on the website, InsidePackSports.com, from Coach Chambers, where he's discussing his thoughts on putting the schedule together. So make sure you check that out. And as always, I want to remind you, subscribe if you haven't yet at Inside Pack Sports here at YouTube.